Somebody went and literally invented a note. I'm the classical nerd, and today we're talking about the Quinary Note. In order to keep track of meter in our music, we utilize time signatures. And most of these time signatures have a specific note value that can fill up the entire bar. 4/4 and 2/2 use the whole note, 3/4 and 6/8 use the dotted half note, 7/4 uses the doubly dotted whole note, etc. The exceptions to this rule include any time signature whose numerator equals 5. This is what a bar of 5/8 looks like. You see, you can't use a half note in here because that only takes up 4/8, while a dotted half note is going to take up 6/8. There's no way using these note values that we can fill up one bar of 5/8 using only one note value. Composers usually who are writing in 5/8 split the bar up into 2+3 or 3+2, and sometimes you even see dotted bar lines to reinforce this, but usually it's just how the eighth notes are beamed and grouped together. Nevertheless, this is how composers fill up bars of 5/8. They have to tie a quarter note to a dotted quarter note in some fashion, depending on what the overriding structure is. But this makes things look really messy really quickly, especially if you're using a lot of these. So, what can you do? Behold the Quinary Note. And it looks like this. Well, it's not really a note inasmuch as it is a kind of augmentation dot. Generally, augmentation dots add 1/2 of the note's value to the note to which it is appended. So a dotted half note equals the same as a half note tied to a quarter note. Subsequent dots keep adding half of the previous half's value, so the second dot is a quarter of the initial note value, and so on. The quinary dot simply appends a quarter of the note's value, much as the second dot does in a doubly dotted note. In a bar of 5/8, 1/4 of a half note is an eighth, which tied to it gives you a way to fill up an entire bar of 5/8. Likewise, in 5/4, all you have to do is simply fill in that bar with a quinary whole note. So one might wonder, why has this system never taken hold? It's quite elegant, it makes sense, it fulfills a very specific need. Well, a lot of it turns out as where it came from. This particular system of notation was derived in the 1970s or thereabouts by a Juilliard ear training professor named Madame Langer, who developed it specifically for the Juilliard composers of that era. But those composers have not really achieved wide acclaim. You don't hear their music in concert halls particularly often, and so whatever favor it had achieved, it more or less fell out of it. It also doesn't preserve the aforementioned 2+3 or 3+2 that pervades any kind of quintuple meter. And other composers just aren't all that thrilled with the idea of including a new note value in the pantheon. So while this notation, and even the term quinary note or quinary augmentation dot, has not really taken hold, the concept has, and you can see it if you look in the right places. Contemporary Finnish composer Aniahani Rautavaara wrote a sonata for flute and guitar where the quinary note looks like this. It's like a double sharp on the wrong side. Anatoly Alexandrov, in his Opus 4 piano sonata, used the concept of the quinary note, but didn't use any kind of augmentation dot at all. He just noted that a half note in 5/8, which is the predominant meter for the sonata, was going to equal a quarter note tied to a dotted quarter note. I learned about the quinary note from the composer Kenneth Frizzell, who learned it directly from Madame Langer during his time at Juilliard. At the end of the day, the quinary note still has the potential to serve a useful purpose in the world of music, but not if no one knows about it. For a time, I felt like I was one of the few people in the world to know the term quinary note and of Madame Langer's notation. But now, I'm telling the world.